I want to devote today's commentary to an alarm, and the alarm can be expressed in one word: tuberculosis. The World Health Organization has now indicated that tuberculosis is the most ravenous, predatory, ferocious, infectious disease killer on the planet. Last year, 1.5 million people died of TB. 1,200,000 died of HIV/AIDS. So TB has surpassed AIDS as the major killer in the world. There were 9 million new cases last year, and the death rate is 4,400 a day. Now, it's particularly painful because tuberculosis, if properly attended to by way of drugs, can be cured. Yes, cured. It's not like AIDS. AIDS can't be cured. There's no cure. But tuberculosis can be cured if the client receives the drugs that are required. It's called drug-susceptible tuberculosis. But if you don't receive the drugs that are required, then you're in danger of having drug-resistant tuberculosis, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, and that happened to 500,000 people last year. That means you're resistant to 2 out of the 4 major tuberculosis drugs, and the regimen for treatment becomes very, very difficult. It can take 20 months to 2 years. It can cost $5,000 to $10,000 or more. It's sometimes 9 or 10 pills a day. It can be very painful, and the death rates are very high. And if you're not able to handle the multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, then you have excessive drug-resistant tuberculosis, which means you're resistant to 3 of the 4 drugs and to a second-line injectable drug. And God knows, death is in the making. Which leads us to dollars and drugs. We're $1.4 billion short of what we need to provide the drugs for the treatment and the cure. And we're $1.3 billion short for research to have new diagnostics and new drugs. You see, the drugs are there, they're suffocating in the pipeline. The pharmaceutical industry won't develop them quickly enough, and when they're developed, they won't provide them quickly enough, not even on compassionate grounds. The prices are too high, and there aren't generic equivalents in India as there are for antiretroviral drugs. Just ask Doctors Without Borders in South Africa what's happening to so many of the patients who are TB afflicted. It's a nightmare. So we have to come together to resolve those problems. And lest you think that TB is purely a disease of the Southeast Asian population like China, India, and Indonesia, where it's endemic and deeply set, or of Western Pacific, don't be mistaken. It's also very highly prevalent in, for example, Southern Africa, where South Africa and Lesotho have the highest incidence rates in the world. And by the way, it's everywhere. London is the tuberculosis capital of Europe. Last year, there were 5 boroughs in London, England, which had tuberculosis rates in excess of the rates in Rwanda, in Eritrea, in Iraq. I mean, it's mind-boggling. There were 2,500 new cases in London last year. So the world has to develop an energy on this. The Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria has to begin to make tuberculosis a centerpiece. In 2013, we spent $5 billion dealing with tuberculosis. We spent $19 billion dealing with HIV/AIDS. I don't begrudge a penny on AIDS, obviously, but the disparity is too great. The world has to come together to deal with this new infectious phenomenon. And now we've got Sustainable Development Goals. We've got a goal for health. It will be a fascinating test to measure our response to TB. Will we show the political leadership, or will we once again be straitjacketed in political paralysis? That was last week. I'm Stephen Lewis.